It all started as a normal afternoon in our house, the kind where you're just hanging out, goofing off with family, when something completely unexpected happens. But trust me, what my sister asked me to do that day with our dog, well, I never saw it coming. I was in the living room playing with our dog Max when my sister walked in with a mischievous smile. Now, I should probably tell you, my sister is the kind of person who always has these wild ideas, the ones that make you question if you really want to be involved. And this time, her suggestion was like nothing we'd ever done before. She was insistent. "Trust me, it'll be fun," she said. And knowing her, I knew she wasn't going to let it go until I agreed. At first, I thought she was joking. Max, our goofy, lovable dog, had always been the center of our attention, but this was different. She wanted me to try something with Max, something that sounded completely bizarre. And of course, she wanted to record it on camera for some strange reason. I'm not exactly the type to make videos like that, but my sister was already setting up the camera. I could feel the tension building. Like, what was I even getting myself into? I stared at Max, who was happily wagging his tail, oblivious to the chaos about to unfold. There was something in my sister's eyes, though. That look. It was the kind of look that told me this wasn't just some innocent idea. But as she started explaining exactly what she wanted me to do, I froze. I honestly didn't know what to think or how to react. The words she said hit me like a punch in the gut. I could feel my heart racing, and for a split second, I considered walking away. But there was something about her excitement, and maybe a little bit of peer pressure, that pushed me forward. So, I gave in. Little did I know, this would lead to one of the most awkward and unforgettable experiences I've ever had, one that I'm still not sure how to process. And, to be honest, I'm not even sure if I want to see what happens next. But now, the camera's rolling, and I'm stuck. What happened next? Well, you'll have to stay tuned. I sat there, staring at my sister, trying to make sense of what was happening. Max, completely unaware of the situation, kept sniffing around as if he was just happy to be in the room. But my sister was serious. She had already set up the camera on the tripod, the lens pointing directly at us, as if this were some sort of professional production. It felt so strange. "Okay, here's the deal," she said, her voice low, almost like she was about to share a big secret. "You're going to do exactly what I tell you. Don't worry, it's going to be hilarious." I tried to laugh it off, but my nerves were getting the best of me. What could she possibly have planned? Was this some sort of prank? She had pulled some crazy ones in the past, but this felt different. There was something more serious about the way she was acting, like she knew something I didn't, and that made me even more uneasy. "You trust me, right?" she asked, locking eyes with me. There was that look again, like she was daring me to back out. And for a moment, I thought about doing just that. I could turn the camera off, walk away, and pretend this conversation never happened. But then I remembered all the times I had let my sister talk me into ridiculous things, and I always ended up regretting it. But those times, I was always the one laughing at the end. This time, though, I had no idea what was coming. Max looked up at me, tail wagging, completely unaware of the strange tension building between my sister and me. But as she began explaining exactly what I needed to do, I felt a chill run down my spine. The more she spoke, the more absurd it sounded. "I'm telling you," she said, "this is gonna be epic. Just trust me." I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. But there I was, on camera, about to do something with Max that I never imagined would be part of my day. My heart pounded as I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. What had I gotten myself into? I glanced at Max again, his big brown eyes staring back at me, full of trust and curiosity. He had no idea what was about to unfold, and I couldn't help but feel guilty for dragging him into this. But my sister was persistent, and I had already agreed to go along with it. I could feel my palms starting to sweat, a knot tightening in my stomach. What if something went wrong? What if I did something that would look completely bizarre on camera? All right, are you ready? My sister asked, her voice laced with excitement. She was practically bouncing on her toes, barely able to contain herself. I nodded, though I felt far from ready. She handed me a leash, the one we used for Max's walks, and motioned for me to follow her to the middle of the living room. Just let him do what he does. The camera will catch everything. I looked at her, trying to make sense of it. What exactly is the plan here? She grinned mischievously, almost like she was enjoying how clueless I was. You'll see. Just let him be himself. She then gestured toward the camera. Everything's gonna be fine. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was going wrong. It felt like we were crossing some invisible line, but I wasn't sure where it was yet. Max, oblivious to my internal panic, trotted happily around the room, sniffing the carpet and wagging his tail. My sister kept the camera rolling, focused on us, waiting for me to make the first move. She was setting this whole thing up as if it was a performance. Everything had to be just right. As I stood there, holding the leash, I realized I didn't feel like myself anymore. My usual sense of humor about her pranks had faded, replaced by a creeping unease. Why was I doing this? What was the point of recording something like this? It felt like I was being drawn into something I didn't fully understand. Okay, I need you to stay calm, my sister said, her tone suddenly serious. She stepped forward, moving toward Max and kneeling down to pet him. She looked at me, her eyes locked on mine. You're going to need to interact with him. Get him to follow your lead. My heart was racing now. I couldn't wrap my head around what she meant by that. Max was just a dog, but there was something about the way she was saying it that made it feel more intense than it should have been. Why was she making this such a big deal? You'll be fine, she reassured me, though there was a strange edge to her voice. Trust me. But as she said that, I couldn't help but feel like I was losing control of the situation. Something about it all felt off. Why did it have to be filmed? Why did she want to make such a big spectacle out of something that could have been simple and fun? My mind was racing, trying to find an escape route, but there was none. I was in it now, and whatever was coming next, I was going to have to face it. Max was looking up at me again, waiting for some sort of cue. My sister was waiting for me to take action, the camera zooming in to capture the moment. Every second felt like an eternity. What had I agreed to? The tension in the room was unbearable. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears. Max was still trotting around, oblivious to the growing unease in the room. But I wasn't sure I could say the same for myself. My sister was watching me with such intensity, as if she was waiting for me to make the next move, and that only made everything feel more suffocating. Come on, just let him follow you, she urged, her voice low but insistent. He'll do the rest. I was beginning to feel like a puppet, with my sister pulling all the strings. Max, on the other hand, was just being himself, happy, excited, and completely unaware of the pressure I was under. His tail wagged in a steady rhythm as he sniffed the ground, occasionally glancing up at me like he was waiting for a signal. The camera was rolling, capturing every second of this bizarre situation. I could almost feel the lens staring at me, its cold presence adding to the weight of the moment. I looked at Max, and then at my sister, who was now standing a few feet away, practically holding her breath as she waited for me to act. Just try it, she said, her voice trembling with barely contained excitement. There was something in her eyes, something I couldn't quite place. It wasn't just about the video. It was like she wanted me to experience something, something that felt deeper than just a silly moment. I swallowed hard, my hands shaking as I gripped the leash. This wasn't just a prank anymore. This was real, and the weight of the decision hit me like a ton of bricks. If I went along with this, what would happen? Would I look ridiculous? Would people understand, or would they think we were both out of our minds? Max was still oblivious, his eyes wide and curious as he wagged his tail, waiting for me to take action. I tried to focus on him, trying to block out the growing pressure, but I couldn't help but wonder, what was this all for? Was this truly something innocent? Or was there a darker reason behind all of this? I took a slow step forward, trying to act casual, but my mind was racing. What if I did something wrong? What if this whole thing turned into a disaster? The silence was deafening, broken only by Max's soft panting and the hum of the camera in the background. I felt like I was teetering on the edge of something big, but I didn't know where it would lead. Just do it, my sister whispered. Her voice had changed. There was a hint of something else in it now, something I couldn't quite identify. And that only made the moment feel more charged. I stood frozen, caught between wanting to back out and the overwhelming urge to follow through. My sister's eyes never left me. Every second felt like it was building to something I wasn't ready for. And I knew, whatever happened next, there was no turning back. I hesitated for a moment, my gaze flickering between my sister and Max. I could feel my pulse quicken as I stood there, trapped in the anticipation of what was coming next. Everything about this felt off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on why. My sister was practically holding her breath, eyes locked on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Just do it, okay?" she said, her voice sharp now, almost impatient. I could tell she was getting frustrated with my delay, but something in her tone, something that wasn't quite right, sent a chill down my spine. It was almost as if she was pushing me, urging me to cross a line I wasn't sure I wanted to cross. I took another step forward, trying to steady myself. Max looked up at me, his tail wagging happily, completely unaware of the tension building in the room. I lowered myself to the floor to get closer to him, trying to ease the anxiety building in my chest. My hands were trembling as I held the leash, and for a moment, I considered backing out. But then, something strange happened. Max, usually so calm and friendly, suddenly froze. His ears perked up, and his eyes darted around the room, as if something had caught his attention. His tail, which had been wagging just moments ago, stilled in an instant. He began to growl, soft at first, but growing louder and more intense. My heart skipped a beat. "What's wrong with him?" I asked, my voice shaky. This wasn't like Max. He was always playful, always eager for attention. But now he seemed off. His body was tense, his fur bristling slightly, and he was staring intently at something behind me. My sister didn't react at first, her gaze still fixed on the camera. But when I looked back at her, I noticed something else in her expression, something I hadn't seen before. There was a look of satisfaction. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. And suddenly, the whole situation took on a different light. What was she not telling me? "Max, what's going on?" I whispered, trying to calm him down. But he wasn't listening. His growl grew louder, more insistent, and now he was backing away from me, his eyes never leaving whatever he was focused on behind me. I slowly turned around, my breath catching in my throat. Nothing. The room was still. There was nothing there. But when I looked back at my sister, the smile on her face had faded. Her eyes were wide, her mouth slightly open, as if she had seen something she wasn't expecting. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to make sense of it. What was going on? Was she playing a game with me? Or was there something deeper happening here that I wasn't seeing? I don't like this, I muttered, taking a step back. But my sister grabbed my arm, her grip stronger than I expected. Her eyes were filled with an emotion I couldn't place. Something dark, something that made me want to run. "Just trust me," she said, her voice low. It was a command, not a suggestion. The camera was still rolling, capturing every moment, and I realized this wasn't just about me anymore. My sister had set this up, but for what? What had she planned? And what was Max reacting to? I was no longer just in front of a camera. I was in the middle of something I couldn't understand, and the stakes were higher than I'd ever imagined. Max suddenly darted to the side, barking wildly. I flinched, my nerves already frayed from the tension, but when I turned to follow his movements, my eyes widened in shock. In the corner of the room, where there had been nothing before, something was there now, something I couldn't explain. My sister's grip tightened on my arm. "Don't look," she whispered, her voice urgent. But it was too late. I had already seen it. I couldn't believe my eyes. In the corner of the room, partially hidden behind the furniture, stood a shadowy figure. It was barely visible, but the shape was unmistakable. Too tall, too distorted to be anything normal. Max continued to bark fiercely, now pacing back and forth, his growls escalating. I felt my heart hammer in my chest, every instinct telling me to run, but I couldn't move. "What, what is that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. My sister was still holding my arm, her grip now painfully tight. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and something else, something I didn't understand. "Don't look," she repeated, but I couldn't pull my gaze away. The figure seemed to be moving, but in jerky, unnatural motions. It was as if it wasn't entirely there. I felt a cold chill creep through my spine, the air suddenly thick with tension. Max suddenly bolted towards the figure, barking louder than ever. My sister screamed, but I didn't have time to react before the figure seemed to dissolve into the shadows, vanishing from sight. I blinked, trying to process what had just happened, but the room was eerily quiet now. Max stopped barking and stood still, his body trembling. "What just happened?" I whispered, my voice shaking as I turned to my sister for answers. But she wasn't looking at me anymore. Her face was frozen in shock, her eyes staring at the empty space where the figure had been. "You shouldn't have seen it," she whispered, almost to herself. My stomach twisted. "What are you talking about?" She slowly turned to face me, her expression unreadable. "I never wanted you to know. But now that you've seen it, I don't think we can go back." Before I could say anything, she reached down and pulled something from her pocket. It was a small old key, rusted and worn, like it had been hidden away for years. "This is why I asked you to do it," she said, her voice trembling with an emotion I couldn't place. "The camera wasn't for the dog, Noman. It was for you. You're part of something bigger than you realize, and now you're involved." I felt my stomach drop. The room seemed to close in around me as I tried to process her words, but it didn't make sense. "Bigger than I realize? What do you mean?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned to Max, who was now sitting calmly, looking up at her as if nothing had happened. But there was something in his eyes that wasn't quite right, something dark. Then, just when I thought I understood, the lights in the room flickered once, then went out completely, plunging us into darkness. The air grew colder, and the silence became deafening. The last thing I heard before everything went black was my sister's voice, barely a whisper. "You were never supposed to see the door, Noman." And with that, everything went dark. When I came to, the room was dimly lit by a faint glow from the window, the morning light creeping in. My head throbbed, and I had no idea how much time had passed. I slowly sat up, blinking in the unfamiliar stillness. The camera was still running, capturing every moment, but my sister was gone. The key she had shown me was now lying on the floor beside me, cold and metallic, as though it had never been touched. I stood up, my legs shaky as I walked toward the corner of the room where the figure had been. But there was nothing there, just an empty space, as though nothing out of the ordinary had happened. Max, who had been so agitated before, was now lying on the couch, looking up at me with calm eyes. Everything seemed normal, yet nothing about this felt right. The confusion in my mind was overwhelming. What had I really seen? Was it all just a trick, some elaborate setup my sister had orchestrated to mess with me? But if it was, why had she left? Why had she been so scared? And why had she shown me the key? I picked it up, turning it over in my hand. The weight of it felt significant, though I couldn't explain why. It was just a key, nothing special. Yet it carried a sense of mystery I couldn't shake. As I walked out of the room, I thought about everything that had happened. The camera, the strange behavior of Max, my sister's cryptic words. Had I been part of something bigger, something I hadn't even begun to understand? Or had I just witnessed a moment of pure madness? The door clicked behind me, and as I stepped out into the quiet of the day, I couldn't help but wonder, was this truly over, or was the key just the beginning?